The story begins not with a battle, but with a birthright that would ignite one of the most dangerous rivalries in royal history. Two women, two queens, bound by blood, divided by power. Mary, Queen of Scots, and Elizabeth I were cousins, yet history would remember them not as family, but as enemies locked in a silent war of survival. One would rule for decades, the other would spend years in captivity, and in the end, one queen would sign the death warrant of the other. Mary Stuart was born into power in 1542, becoming Queen of Scotland when she was just 6 days old. Her life, from the very beginning, was shaped by political ambition far beyond her control. Raised in the glittering court of France, she was educated, cultured, and prepared for a life of queenship. By the age of 16, she married Francis II of France and briefly became Queen of France. But her rise was short-lived. Within a year, Francis died, and Mary, still a teenager, found herself widowed and forced to return to Scotland, a land she barely knew, divided by religious conflict and political instability. Meanwhile, in England, Elizabeth Tudor's path to the throne had been anything but secure. Declared illegitimate after the execution of her mother, Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth grew up in uncertainty, navigating a court filled with suspicion and shifting loyalties. But in 1558, she ascended the throne and would go on to become one of England's most powerful and enduring monarchs. Her reign brought stability, Protestant reform, and a careful balance of diplomacy that kept England from falling into chaos. And yet, despite never meeting in person, the lives of these two queens became deeply intertwined because of a single, explosive question: who had the rightful claim to the English throne? To many Catholics in Europe, Elizabeth's legitimacy was questionable. They saw her as the daughter of an unlawful marriage, and therefore not the rightful queen. Mary, on the other hand, was a direct descendant of Henry VII through his daughter Margaret Tudor, making her a strong alternative claimant. In the eyes of Elizabeth, this made Mary not just a cousin, but a threat. At first, their relationship remained distant, defined more by diplomacy than hostility. But the situation began to unravel after Mary returned to Scotland in 1561. Her reign there was plagued by tension between Catholic and Protestant factions, and her personal decisions would only deepen the crisis. In 1565, she married her cousin Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, a union that was politically advantageous but personally disastrous. Darnley proved volatile, ambitious, and deeply unpopular. Their marriage quickly deteriorated into conflict. Then came the turning point that would forever damage Mary's reputation. In 1567, Darnley was found dead under mysterious circumstances. His residence destroyed in an explosion, his body discovered nearby. Suspicion fell heavily on James Hepburn, Earl of Bothwell, a powerful nobleman, and soon after, Mary married him. Whether she was complicit, coerced, or manipulated remains one of history's most debated questions. But to many of her subjects, the marriage confirmed their worst fears. The backlash was swift and unforgiving. Scottish nobles rebelled, and Mary was forced to abdicate in favor of her infant son, James VI and I. Imprisoned and isolated, she managed a daring escape, but her attempt to reclaim power failed. With nowhere else to turn, she made a fateful decision that would seal her destiny. In 1568, Mary fled to England and into the hands of Elizabeth. What followed was not an act of refuge, but the beginning of a long and calculated captivity. Elizabeth faced an impossible dilemma. Executing a fellow monarch could set a dangerous precedent, but allowing Mary to live freely risked rebellion, invasion, and the destabilization of her own reign. And so, Elizabeth chose a middle path. Mary would be kept under house arrest, moved from castle to castle, always watched, always controlled. For nearly 19 years, Mary remained a prisoner in England. But even in confinement, she remained a symbol, a rallying point for Catholic plots against Elizabeth. Conspiracies formed around her name, fueled by foreign powers and internal dissent. And whether Mary actively encouraged these plots or was simply used by others remains a matter of historical debate. The tension reached its peak with the Babington plot. This conspiracy aimed not only to assassinate Elizabeth, but to place Mary on the English throne. Crucially, letters were intercepted, letters that appeared to show Mary's approval of the plan. Historians continue to debate the extent of her involvement, but for Elizabeth's government, the evidence was enough. Mary was put on trial in 1586. She defended herself fiercely, arguing that as a foreign queen, she should not be subject to English law. But the verdict had already been shaped by fear, politics, and the need for security. She was found guilty of treason. Elizabeth hesitated. For weeks, she delayed signing the execution warrant. The decision weighed heavily, not just politically, but morally. To execute Mary was to cross a line that no English monarch had crossed before, the sanctioned killing of another anointed queen. But in the end, she signed. On the 8th of February 1587, Mary, Queen of Scots, was led to her execution at Fotheringhay Castle. She dressed in red, the color of martyrdom, and faced her death with composure and dignity. In her final moments, she declared her faith, forgave her enemies, and met her fate not as a defeated prisoner, but as a queen to the very end. With a single stroke, the rivalry that had defined decades of tension came to a brutal and irreversible conclusion. And yet, even in death, Mary's story did not end. Ironically, her son, James VI of Scotland, would later inherit the English throne after Elizabeth's death in 1603, becoming James I of England. The bloodline Elizabeth had once feared would ultimately succeed her. The cousin she had executed would live on through the very dynasty that followed. This is what makes their story so haunting, because it was never just about power. It was about identity, legitimacy, religion, and survival in a world where a crown could be both a blessing and a death sentence. Elizabeth ruled with caution, intelligence, and control, preserving her throne at all costs. Mary lived with passion, emotion, and boldness, choices that ultimately led to her downfall. One queen mastered the game of power, the other became trapped within it. And even now, centuries later, their story refuses to fade. Because it forces us to confront an uncomfortable question. Was Mary, Queen of Scots, truly a victim of circumstance? A queen undone by betrayal, politics, and misfortune? Or was her fate the result of decisions that placed her directly in the path of danger? And what of Elizabeth I? Was she a calculated ruler who did what was necessary to protect her kingdom? Or a monarch who ultimately sacrificed family for power? In the end, this was not just a rivalry. It was a collision between two worlds, two beliefs, two destinies, and one irreversible decision. Because sometimes the most dangerous enemy is not a stranger, but someone who shares your blood. So now, as this story echoes through history, one question remains. Was Mary, Queen of Scots, a tragic queen destroyed by forces beyond her control? Or did her own choices lead her to the execution block? Type your thoughts below.